I might have been 10 years old. My mother dropped me off at the family business so that I could go have lunch with my father. She was taking my brother to a doctor's appointment, I think. And I walked into the business and I walked into my father's office and he looked up at me and said, "Oh, Scott, hang on a second." And he picked up the phone and he says, "Paging Alvin Conway. Alvin Conway to the sales office, please." Because my grandfather had just been there. He left just a few minutes earlier. And it was quick enough that my dad was pretty sure if I page him right away, I might catch him before he drives off. Well, just a few minutes later, my grandfather walks in and says, "I'm still here. What's up?" And says, "Well, I was thinking, have you had lunch yet?" And he says, "No, I haven't." He's like, "How about if the Conway men all go have lunch?" And Alvin Conway and his son, Gary Conway, and his son, Scott Conway, all headed down El Cajon Boulevard, down near 30th Street, to have chicken fried steak at Rudford's restaurant. And I can trace back the fact that I still like chicken fried steak today because of that lunch on that one day when 3 generations of Conway men went out to lunch. And my grandfather ordered chicken fried steak and my father ordered chicken fried steak. And so, of course, I also ordered chicken fried steak. And I have liked it ever since because there's emotion connected to that memory. It doesn't just have a texture and a taste. It has a feeling attached. This is Pastor Scott Conway from Quest to Zion, and happy Father's Day. And one of my friends complained that very often when he's in a church on Mother's Day, it's like, "Oh, Aunt Mother's wonderful." And one of the common things talked about mothers on Mother's Day is, "Oh, look at all of these jobs mothers do. And if mothers actually got paid for all of the work they did, it would be $375,000. And then he goes to church on Father's Day and it's like, "Okay, men, you have to shape up. You have to get involved." And the idea is that Aunt Mother's wonderful. And hey, men, you need to do a better job. Well, I will tell you, men, by and large, do a pretty darn good job. That if you are a father and you are already present with your children, congratulations. Here are some of the impacts being around have. That when there's a mother and a father involved, the risk of poverty drops a fourfold. It is 1/4 of the probability of poverty if you have a 2-parent household, which is pretty obvious, I think, because now you have 2 parents to both take care of the household and to provide the living. When there's an involved father, the kids are less likely to have behavioral problems. Now, if you just think about that logically, you go, okay, so you have a partnership that is parenting, or you have an individual that is parenting. It would make sense that when you have 2 adults in the home helping take care of things, that it's easier to teach the kids, to lead the kids, to be an example for the kids. When you have a present father in the home, the children are less likely to grow up to commit crimes, less likely to grow up to go to prison. Now, there's some interesting stats too, is that when there's a father around, children are less likely to drop out of high school. Now, what's interesting about that particular number is, from what I've been told, is that's just the presence of a father, period. So in the United States of America, we have something like 18 million children who live in a home without a father. Now, that's without their biological father, without their stepfather, without an adoptive father, that there's just no father figure. And in all of the households, you have some 12 million households with those 18 million and change children. And of those 12 million single parent households, 2 million of them are single dads raising their children without a mom. So this idea that that men just abandon the kids, and well, maybe they stick around, with the mom because they want the mom, but they don't want the kids. Well, we have 2 million examples where it's the fathers raising their children. 2 million, 2 million households. Now, compared to the 10 million of a woman, of course, it's a smaller number, obviously. But when you have the men involved, we make a difference. When children grow up with a father, especially when they grow up with a mother and father, the probability of becoming pregnant if they're a daughter, or getting someone pregnant if they're a son, drops considerably. If you have a mother and a father both raising the children together, that probability drops down a sevenfold. A sevenfold. Think about how huge that is. Is that if there's a 70% chance that a daughter would get pregnant out of wedlock, or that a son will conceive a child out of wedlock, that if you have mom and dad working together as parents, the probability of that happening drops down to 10%. Obviously, it still happens, but the probability drops way down because you have a mom and a dad. And when you begin to put all of these things together, and you begin to look at them in terms of the partnership of the parents, and just how vitally important the presence of the fathers are, that by being around and being involved, we make a huge difference. Dad's involvement during a mother's pregnancy it influences the health outcomes for mom and the baby. Daughters who are raised by a father, whether a father individually or a father in concert with the mother, are less likely to engage in risky sexual behavior, and definitely less inclined to do it at such a young age. And when here's part of how that seems to work, is when she knows that she has the love and the affection and the attention of a man, and doesn't have to trade anything for it, that she feels much more centered, much more grounded. But if she's lacking that and she's craving that, and then she has to trade sex for that love, attention, and affection with the boy, well, she's much more likely to do that by sometimes as much as 7 times. That's part of the power that we bring to a family, that we bring to a household by being involved. And there's some interesting things too, is that when you're dealing with empathy, it would seem that typically between men and women tend to be better at emotional empathy than men are. And one would think, well, then therefore, children who grow up with a mother as opposed to a father would learn empathy from the mother. But part of what seems to happen is, because the children tend to be the recipients of the empathy rather than the practitioners of the empathy, it is the presence of a father that actually generates more empathetic children, because they don't get an almost narcissistic, I am the center of the universe sense of themselves, where they feel like the world revolves around them, and that someone else's emotions revolve around them, and someone else is revolving around their emotion. That having that balance of the masculine energy and the feminine energy makes a huge difference. Now, among single moms, I hear a lot of them, I think quite reasonably, complain that I have to be both the mother and the father. And essentially what they're saying is, I have to do all of it. I have to provide for the household. I have to take care of the household. I have to take care of, I'm doing the entire range of the job. And a lot of the single moms, as much as I will tell you, almost all the single moms I have ever known rock. That in conversation with almost all of them, ask them, would you rather do this by yourself, or would you rather do this with a great partner? I have yet to have one say, well, if it's a choice between by myself or with a great partner, I would much rather have a great partner. Now, if it's a choice between by themselves or with a horrible partner, or a toxic partner, an abusive partner, of course they would rather do it by themselves. That's pretty obvious, I think, hopefully for all of us. Would you rather have a job working for a toxic boss, or would you rather have a job working for a healthy boss? All of us would say healthy. Where the problem isn't that they don't want a man, it's that they don't want a toxic, abusive jerk. And I think all of us can understand that. But here gets to be one of the curious things is we don't even have to be exceptional men to be great at being a dad. 82% of studies on father involvement and child well-being published since 1980, so we're going back 40 years, show quote unquote significant associations between positive father involvement and offspring well-being. And I'm reading some stuff here. In an analysis of over 100 studies on parent-child relationships, it was found that having a loving and nurturing father was as important for a child's happiness, a child's well-being, a child's social success, and a child's academic success as having a loving and nurturing mother. And some of those studies even indicated father love was a stronger contributor to some important positive child well-being outcomes than having a mother involved. Now, that gets pretty significant. And then according to child psychologist Kyle Pruitt, a father's more active play style, more active being a euphemism for more rough housing, more rough and tumble type play, and comparatively slower response to a toddler infant experiencing frustration serve to promote problem-solving competencies and independence in the child. Now, note that there's this interplay between the masculine and the feminine here. What has been found in a variety of studies is that when you have a child who is struggling, mothers are much more prone to just jump in and help. Now, some of these habits might have been, developed when the child was an infant, where the crying meant that a diaper either instantly needed to be changed or the child was hungry. And usually, if you're breastfeeding, of course, it's the mother that's equipped to do that. But in balance, the masculine tends to give the child some time to sort it out when they're struggling with like a math problem. Fathers will tend to ask questions and let the child struggle and tell the child if they're on the right track or the wrong track. While mothers are more likely to give them the right answer and ask them, well, do you think that maybe 2 + 2 could be 4? And now here gets to be one of the curious things. If you just have the masculine by itself, sometimes academics can be really, really frustrating because you want some more help. And if it's just done in the instant help way, it's like, well, so long as I'm incompetent and then I wait, the answer gets given to me. And either one of those in excess creates academic difficulties, either frustration or learned helplessness. But in balance with one another and how they interplay off of one another, that tends to lead to much more success. And in a 26-year-long study, researchers found that the number one factor in developing empathy in children was father involvement. How curious. Fathers spending regular time alone with their children translated into children who became compassionate adults. And so we have all of these kind of interesting stats and interesting ideas. And yet in the middle of all of this, we have tons of struggle with all sorts of related things. And here's a big one. This was my father's struggle. So I told you about when I was 10. I told you about the lunch that we got to have together. But when I was 19, my father had been diagnosed with cancer. He and I were in college together, and it looked likely based upon he was going at a slower rate because he was also running a business, and I was going at a faster rate. And that when we combined how many units he had as he was going into his junior year and while I was in my freshman year, it was looking more and more likely that, oh, we'll probably be able to graduate together. So if I maintain this pace, so I graduate in 4 years on schedule, and he maintained the pace that he was at, he was going to graduate the same year I was going to graduate. And 2 generations of Conway men were going to walk down that aisle together and get their bachelor's degree. And then he got diagnosed with cancer and everything changed. Once he was diagnosed with cancer, he dropped out of college. He was going to have to tend to his health. And he did less work running his business day to day as he focused on tending to his health. And one of the things that came to his attention when he knew that death was a high probability is that there was something he needed to talk to me about. And he asked me to come to his side. And I remember coming, he was in his recliner. He had his IV tower, and his IV was in kind of feeding him his cocktail of drugs. And I said, Scott, I need to talk to you. So I came and I sat down, and I said, Scott, you're not much of a man. And I can't help you because I never figured it out. You're smart. You'll have to figure it out. You're not much of a man. Well, you can imagine. I didn't much care to hear that. And I was kind of annoyed at that for a while. Like, well, okay, well, I guess he has a point. Because I could kind of tell, okay, there was something off. I didn't know what it was. But he could tell that I was missing something. And then I thought, well, how could my own father say that to me? Followed it pretty quickly by, okay, well, who else is going to say that to me? I mean, could my mother say that to me? Well, she could say that I'm not much of the kind of a man that a woman would want me to be. But something that takes a man who's respected and honored as a man that can say, okay, this man thing, you're not nailing it. You're not getting it. But then he said, I can't help you because I never figured it out. Now, I kind of got hung up on that one a bit because I'm going, now, wait a second. So, okay, I'm 19. I have been legally an adult for under 2 years. And he'd been 22 years older than me. So he had a 22-year head start. He had 24 years as an adult. And he didn't have the answer, and I'm supposed to figure it out. So I set about trying to figure it out because he was part of what he ran into. He thought, okay, I can tell kind of intuitively, subjectively, that my son's missing something. And I look around me and I'm trying to figure out what it is. Like, okay, well, the idea of, well, men are successful with women. Okay, well, Scott's very successful with women. He's had multiple girlfriends. He goes on multiple dates. In 3, 4, 5 years of prom season, I went to like 8 proms as the prom date. And so clearly it didn't have anything to do with being successful with women. That, well, is it, I don't know, something about being ambitious and being successful? Well, for 19 years old and having been, in college and working toward my degree and having, honor roll in high school, and I had a varsity letter. I won the Patriot of the Year award while I was in high school. I was involved. I was a leader, and which is another one. It's like, well, there's masculinity about leadership. It's like, well, he's been the president of the gaming club, and he's been the president of this, and he's been the leader in that group and the leader in this other group, and so he's doing leadership. So it's not leadership. Is it like being strong, being tough, being able to fight? Well, he's been doing martial arts since he was 6. So, I mean, he knows how to fight, and he stands up for the little guy, and he gets in the way of the bully. And so it's not that either. And so he's kind of left with this thing of, so what is it? I don't know what it is, but something's missing. And part of what I teach now is my answer to that commission I received from my father. You're smart. You'll have to figure it out. Well, you start to look at these pieces. Now you begin to look at it like, okay, I had all those things going for it. How could I be not much of a man? Well, now we can look back at it and go, okay, so masculinity is responsibility, initiative with inviting, power with selflessness. And let's go take a look at that and go, okay, were there any things that were mine to do that I wasn't doing? was doing okay on my responsibilities. If it was mine to do and I knew it was mine to do, I pretty much got it done. But that initiative thing, you go, okay, so initiative. Now, initiative is just do it. Initiative at the very lowest level is wait until you're asked. And then if the answer is yes, then you go do it. But one of the things I struggled with at that time is how much I allowed circumstances to drive my life. Wasn't making decisions as much as I was being backed in the corners. And then I would find, okay, well, from here, like what do I do from here? So even though I was involved in leadership, I was involved in leadership largely because I was solving problems. And you know what happens when you solve problems? People like you solving problems. And so then they say, okay, well, then you're in charge. What do we do next? Because when you have clarity of thought at a time when others are confused, you end up being the leader. So I didn't end up being the leader because I'm working out this big strategic advantage thing and I am seeking leadership and assuming the mantle of responsibility and assuming the mantle of personal power. I was kind of thrust into leadership. It was almost like the path of least resistance was to become president of these clubs and secretary in that clubs and a director in this other club. And so I wasn't making decisions. I wasn't making choices. I was just kind of being presented with this ever-changing menu of options, and certain things would just kind of naturally float to the top. And so I wasn't necessarily making strategic decisions. Like even how did I end up in college? Well, I was working full time. I was looking for like, well, what am I going to do from here? There's really, not a lot for me to do here. And then I was looking at the Marine Corps and I was signed up delayed entry because my MOS, my military occupational specialty, I don't know if they call that something different now, but this was 35 years ago. Didn't have an opening for like an entire year. So, okay, so I was on the list, but it was going to be a year. Well, what am I going to do to occupy the year? Well, I needed to do something productive. So I went to college. So it was either get a job or go to school. And so I said, well, I'll go to school. And no, I'm not sitting around thinking, okay, well, what's best? What's a good leverage of my time? How am I going to make this decision? What are the governing principles? I'm just kind of going with the flow. And I'm not really making clear-headed decisions. I'm just kind of like going along with whatever happens. And that's not initiative. Initiative is when you just go do something. You don't wait until you're kind of pushed into it. You don't wait until it presents itself and now it's just one step away. And so you take the step without really doing any analysis or any real thoughtfulness. It's just, it's there. Okay, fine. Yeah, I guess I'll do that. Oh, that's there. Okay, fine. I guess I'll do that. So I wasn't being strategic. Even in my faith, once I accepted Christ, I wasn't learning a set of principles. I wasn't learning an underlying a set of concepts and ideas. I was just kind of absorbing what I was being taught. And I was pretty radical. And in fact, I would even say obnoxiously so. Kind of like, the ex-smoker syndrome is there a few people that are more annoying to deal with on a particular subject than people who have just gotten out or just gotten in? Because that's when we tend to be the most radical. But I wasn't taking the initiative and I wasn't exercising my personal power to moderate my approach and to learn and to think about it before I stepped out in boldness. So I'm stepping out in bold ignorance. So, well, that's not very masculine to step out in bold ignorance. That's not initiative because it's lacking that quality of power where you're making a good decision. Initiative is stepping out to do a good thing, not stepping out to do a thing because you feel some kind of a stirring. That's being more driven by feelings, more driven by emotion, and that was lacking something. And then some of the ways I went about it was quite understandably somewhat off-putting. Has anyone noticed how someone's being a bit radical can be a little off-putting? Well, off-putting means that I've kicked out that inviting supercharge to my initiative. And then in the exercise of my personal power is doing something, whether you want to or not, or stopping to do something, whether you want to keep on doing it or not. And I wasn't exercising a whole lot of personal power because a lot of personal power has to do, okay, when you no longer want to do this thing that's good for you, do you stick to it because you decided? When you want to keep doing this thing that you know is bad for you, that you know you shouldn't be doing, do you stop because you know you should stop? So that the power is the ability to do and the ability to restrain. And then that's supposed to have a selflessness supercharge where it's not about me, it's about everyone. And I'm one of the everyone. And to put that together and not to be so self centered and so self focused and so self aggrandizing that you kind of get lost in all of that. And so when you begin to put all those things together, you go, okay, well, if I was going to give myself a grade on my responsibility, I was probably doing all right there. I give myself probably a B, maybe even an A on responsibility. But when it came to initiative, probably about a C on initiative and a C or a D on inviting. That when it came to individual relationships with certain specific people, I did pretty good there. But on the whole, with people, yeah, really not so good. And in well, I'm going to skip the selflessness for a moment. We're going to look on a selfishness, which is a self-centeredness versus selflessness, of seeing the innate equality of all people. There was a heavy motive to protect and to defend, a heavy motive to make a difference and make sure things got done for people. But there was an awful lot of taking center stage. And in particular, as I was moving along later on in my college years, and one of my big wake-up calls one day was realizing, I'm kind of like showcasing myself in all of these different things. And what I really need to do is stand down. And instead of just answering like a math question because I could, let's leave that to the people who have their degrees they're pursuing in mathematics or in economics. And let's leave the math to the math people. And even if I may have the right answer, and even if for whatever reason I might even come up with it faster than someone else, leave it to them. Let them have the spotlight. That's their thing. And issue after issue, realizing, you know what? Let me limit what I do to that which others do not do. So I'm giving out the spotlight so that I make it not about me, and let it be about each individual in each of their specialty. And then let me defend their position. So that if any of the others of us are jumping in and stepping on someone else's toes and stepping on somebody else's moment, let me be part of the catalyst to make sure that each of us gets our spotlight. And, I wasn't doing that really well when I was younger. And then the power. Well, if we look at power, is the power to control ourselves. And we look at power as self-discipline. Well, the power to control ourselves is, can you get yourself to go when you should go? Can you get yourself to stop when you should stop? Can you stop what you've always been going on because you know you should stop? Can you go on what you don't want to do and you'd rather not because you know you should go? I mean, that's a pretty clear part of power. Another big part of power that kind of intersects and weaves into initiative is, can you make good proactive decisions and then follow through on those decisions? Well, here's something I definitely didn't know back then. And a mastery that I only developed a bit later in life is realizing the power of submission to that. Because could I come up with good answers? I could. Could I follow through on my own good answers? Okay, well, sometimes that was a problem. Because sometimes it's as simple a thing as, like, you walk into your room, it's like, oh, it's a mess. It should be cleaned up. Okay, that sounds good. So get it cleaned up. And then you find every reason in the book to do everything possible but that. It's almost like the only way to get the room cleaned up is either someone's coming over and I'm going to feel embarrassed if they see this, or I have something else I need to do that I'm procrastinating on even more. And so I'm cleaning up. So I'm doing productive procrastination. And that's not very good submission, because so much of power Like, to do that which you ought to do means I am submitting to that good decision to do the thing. To stop doing the thing I shouldn't do means I have agreed I should stop. There's been a good decision made. I need to submit to my own agreement that the thing needs to stop. And what I realized as I got older is one of my problems when I was younger is a lack of submission to the decisions I already acknowledged were good moves. So when I reflect back now and go, okay, so if I could join the conversation, 55-year-old Scott could join the conversation between 19-year-old Scott and my dad, who would have been, what, 43? And be able to translate. When he said, Scott, you're not much of a man. I can't help you. I don't know what it is. You're smart. You'll have to figure it out. And you can say, well, I can give you a formula that might be able to help. And here's the 5 parts of the formula. And if you do these 5 parts, you'll have it pretty well nailed. So let's diagnose where you are in relationship to these 5 parts. And if I could make a similar diagnosis of myself back then, because, you know, if someone just shows up and tells you these things, sometimes you're somewhat resistant when someone is telling you these things. But if I could have an illuminating conversation so that young me could draw these conclusions, most of these things could be fixed pretty quickly. So like that spotlight thing, when that really hit me. And what was curious is that the way that one hit me was through Dungeons and Dragons. I was playing a character named Nathaniel Raymond. And Nathaniel Raymond was the only surviving character from, like, you know, a chain of multiple adventuring parties. So he was more powerful and had more abilities and had more of this, that, and whatnot than, you know, any of the other player characters. And what ended up happening is everyone was leaning on him to keep on doing the thing. And it was like, no, wait a second. It's not Raymond and witnesses. It's supposed to be a group. It's supposed to be an adventuring party. And so we took to calling that the Raymond syndrome, when you keep on doing all of the things so much that you end up being better at all of the things, and then other people don't get as good at any of the things because you're always the one doing all of the things, and go, oh my God, I do that. And then I had to fix that. Now, the fix was easy. Practicing the fix, the trials to acquisition of how many times I blew it. Not entirely sure. I would like to think that I probably didn't blow it enough times to like need more than one hand to count, but that's just the ones I'm aware of. I'm sure I probably blew it more often than that. But there was some measure of trials to acquisition, and eventually I did get better at that. And that's going to be the case with almost anything we do. And so when we show up as men, when my father was trying to raise a man, one of the things we were missing is, well, what does that even mean? So right now it's 2021, and one of the big hot potato political issues has to do with transsexuals. And there's a curious thing in transsexuality where they say, well, you know, it's a man who thinks he's a woman. It's a woman who thinks he's a man. And depending where you are, it's like, okay, so if you're a biological male, but you feel female, and so you're going to identify with that female feeling. So not just be an effeminate man, that you're going to be a trans woman. Now, however that decision gets made, here's the part of it I find intriguing. Somewhere in that process is some kind of a subjective, almost intuitive idea that, well, then there's something here that's male, masculine, and there's something else here that's female, that's feminine. Because you can't transition from one to the other or back again if you don't have some idea, well, this is this thing and I'm not this thing. And that is that thing and I am that thing. And then when you make the transition, it's like, okay, so now I'm this thing, and this thing has these qualities, and I'm no longer that thing, and that thing has those qualities. You know, So in some way, shape, or form, we have some ideas that there is a masculine and there is a feminine, there is a male, there is a female, there's a man way of living life, there's a woman way of living life. And what gets to be curious is when you think about just the idea of all of this and the questions that leads to. Now, no, I'm not making the argument one way or the other, because otherwise that ends up being what this is about. But the point is in the middle of this hot potato political issue, without stopping to really realize that in some way, shape, or form, we are defining what it means to be a man and defining what it means to be a woman in such a way that you can be one or the other and you can switch, which means that there has to be some definition of one that you can leave behind to acquire the definition of the other. That means in some way, shape, or form, we have this societal, cultural, and or innate psychological understanding that we do have these, which gets to be kind of interesting to think about. So as fathers, having both a father and a mother, having the presence of both the masculine and the feminine, in some way, shape, or form, we understand that these are different things. In some way, shape, or form, we understand that this partnership is a partnership between equals that show up with different qualities, and that it makes the partnership more expansive. And so as fathers, we get to show up and we get to model a lot of stuff. We get to be the counterpoint to a lot of things. We get to be the balancing force to a lot of things. We get to demonstrate and model responsibility and initiative and power. And we get to be the example and explain the example you're being. And then here gets to be a big one. I was talking to a young lady, and she was in her 20s, post-college, and she was getting married. Now, here gets to be one of the incredible powers of the presence of a father. And she said that my father is my standard. If he doesn't treat me at least as well as my father treats me, it's not worth the relationship. And if he's not going to treat me as well and be as committed to me as my father is to my mother, it's not worth marrying. I found the man. Well, importantly, and this happens again and again and again, where the father sets the standard for the daughters about the kind of man she's looking for, either in duplication or in contrast. And what is a sad part about that is that too often we get the duplication of the bad stuff. I don't know why that happens. Sometimes we get contrast with the good stuff, and I don't know why that happens either. But my mother used to say that when you're a parent, you find your kids will copy about 50% of what you do right and about 100% of what you do wrong. And it was hilarious because, okay, you can imagine this one. A friend of mine was watching her nephews and says, I was together with them for the whole 2 days, for the entire weekend. And we had all this interaction, all of this stuff. And in the course of the weekend, one time I uttered one swear word because I got frustrated in that one moment. And at the end of the 2 full days, what did the boys pick up? They picked up my one swear word. They picked up the one time I lost it. And for less than a second and a half, I said something I shouldn't have said, and they grabbed it and they ran with that. And now that's part of their vocabulary. What happened about all that other stuff that I went so far out of my way to do on purpose? And you know, and the hilarity of that is, of course, my mother always taught me, expect your kids to do 100% of what you do wrong and about 50% of what you do right. But here's part of the key. A lot of it is be the example and explain the example you're being and how you go about that. And so dads, on this Father's Day, I want to thank you for all the dads that are examples. I want to thank dads for all the dads that are involved with their kids. All of the dads that look out for their kids, all of the dads that are the protectors and the providers, all of the dads that set the bar and set the standard, showing your daughters how a man should treat a woman and how they as a woman should expect to be treated by a man. who models for their sons. This is how a man lives his life. This is how a man does his responsibilities. And all of these things that we do as fathers, for those of you who are the biological fathers, that you conceive this child with the mother and that you're married parenting partners, or all of the fathers that are involved with their children who are separate from the mothers and who are co-parenting their kids, but co-parenting the kids apart. To all of the stepfathers who volunteer to step into sometimes sticky situations and to do your best with the position that you have. To all of the adopted fathers who made it a child that you did not conceive your child. And to all of the foster parents, all the foster fathers who invest in these children without having any real legal status with them. For all of these men, I commend you. For all of the father figures that are involved in the lives of these children, I commend you. And I thank you for being involved. And I hope having an understanding of the power of masculinity will allow you to show up as a stronger example, because now you can be the example. And this is the big part for sensei leadership, explain the example you're being. And martial arts, a sensei means teacher. But when we really unpack it, especially out of Guardian Kempo Kajuko Do, we tell you that a sensei is one who has walked the path and can show others the way. Or the short version, be the example and explain the example you're being. And whether you're doing this for your biological children, you're doing this for your adopted children, you're doing this for your stepchildren, you're doing this for your foster children, or you're doing this as an uncle, a family friend, or a powerful male presence. Maybe you're a grandfather, maybe you're just good friends of the family. To show up and help raise modern day knights, both the boys and the girls, by standing there as our example, doing our job in this world as men, making that powerful difference that ripples down the generations. I commend you, and happy Father's Day.